Welcome to Nick's Scary Stories. Our first tale begins in the historic neighborhood of Bungalow Heaven, Pasadena, where families restore old homes full of charm, warmth, and sometimes something else entirely. When a couple decided to remove the sealed fireplace in their living room, they expected to find old bricks or forgotten wiring. Instead, they found a door. In early 2022, my cousin Nora and her fiancé, Caleb, bought a 1910 bungalow in Bungalow Heaven. One of those gorgeous old homes with a deep porch, big windows, and real wood everything. It needed some work, but they were excited. They planned to restore it themselves. The living room had a brick fireplace sealed decades ago. The flue was closed, the hearth filled with cement. Caleb wanted to tear it out and replace it with bookshelves. That's when they made the discovery. Behind the fireplace, past 2 layers of brick and plaster, they found a wood-framed door. Small, narrow, with old iron hinges. No handle. Just a keyhole. They stared at it for a long time. Caleb wanted to open it right away, but Nora said no. Something about it gave her a sick feeling, like it wasn't supposed to be found. That night, they went to sleep with the living room torn up. At 3:17 a.m., Nora woke to the sound of someone breathing. She turned over. Caleb was sound asleep. The breathing continued, shaky, labored, coming from the living room. She sat up in bed. Listen, it stopped. The next morning, Caleb went to the hardware store and bought a set of skeleton keys, old restorer's tools just in case the keyhole still worked. One of them fit. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Behind it was a narrow stairway. Wood walls. No lights. They followed the steps down. At the bottom, a square room. Low ceiling. Dirt floor. Lined with old furniture. A crib, a rocking chair, a dresser with peeling paint. All child-sized. On one wall was a faded mural of stars and trees, hand-painted, the colors nearly gone. Nora swore she felt a breeze, but there were no windows. Then they found something worse. Scratches on the door, from the inside. Tiny, frantic claw marks, etched into the wood near the lock. And on the far side of the room, a note pinned to the wall. She doesn't like it when you open the door. They went back upstairs and closed it, locked it again. That night, Nora had a dream. She was in the room, but it wasn't empty. A girl stood in the corner, pale, hair in her face, whispering something in a high, dry voice. Don't let him unlock it again. The next morning, Caleb was gone. Nora found him downstairs, standing at the open fireplace, staring into the dark. He didn't speak, didn't blink. When she touched his shoulder, he turned, startled. Said he didn't remember coming down. That day, they sealed the door again, replaced the bricks, covered it with drywall, tried to forget. But the whispering continued. Only Nora could hear it. Every night at 3:17. And sometimes, she wakes to find dusty footprints on the floor. Tiny ones. Leading from the wall where the fireplace used to be, to the foot of her bed. Story 2. The One in the Walls. Location. Near Caltech, Pasadena, 2021. I moved to Pasadena in 2021 to study at Caltech. Rent was steep, so I found a room in an old 4-bedroom house about a 10-minute walk from campus. The place was narrow and creaky, with fading yellow paint and a crooked chimney, but the price was right and the landlord was hands-off. I had the smallest room, upstairs, back of the house, tucked between a bathroom and what used to be an attic door. The first time I walked in, I noticed how unusually quiet it was. Not peaceful. Just dead quiet, like sound didn't travel there. 2 nights in, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a tapping sound in the wall. Not scratching. Not knocking. Just light, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming softly against plaster. It was coming from the wall behind my headboard. I froze, listened. After about 20 seconds, it stopped. I thought it might be pipes or maybe rats, but it kept happening. Every night. Always between 2 o'clock and 2:15 a.m. The tapping would start, pause, then resume on a different part of the wall, always in motion, always soft. One night I pressed my ear to the wall and whispered, "Is someone there?" The tapping stopped instantly. Then I heard a different sound, a shift, like someone moving their weight. I backed away and turned on every light in the room. Didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I asked the other tenants if they'd ever heard anything. A girl named Mel nodded slowly. "You're in room 4, right?" she asked. I nodded. She said nobody had stayed in that room more than a few months. One guy left after a week. Another moved out mid-semester without notice. One tenant claimed she found teeth inside the wall vent, baby teeth wrapped in an old tissue. Mel laughed nervously and said, It's probably just rats. Or old house stuff. But I started noticing other things. Sometimes when I came home, my door would be cracked open an inch. I knew I had closed it. Once my pillow was flipped. My textbook, open on the desk before I left, was back on the shelf. I installed a cheap door camera. Nothing strange at first. Then one night I heard the tapping again. But this time it was coming from the floor vent. I got down on my hands and knees and shined my phone flashlight into the metal grate. There was only darkness. But I felt cold air brushing my face even though the AC wasn't on. Then I heard it, a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice. Female. Dry. Right below me. I ripped the vent off and stared into the dark shaft. That's when I saw it, a small metal handle embedded in the wall of the vent. Like a hatch. I pulled it. The section of vent popped open, revealing a tunnel, a crawl space, running behind the walls of the house. I could see wooden beams and old insulation. The smell hit me instantly, stale air, dust, something sweet and rotten. I turned on my phone's flashlight and peered inside. Just past the opening there was a blanket, a set of folded clothes, and a doll. Handmade with button eyes and a stitched mouth. I stepped back, closed the hatch. The next morning I called the landlord. Told him what I found. He sighed and said, "Yeah, that's been there a while. We had a girl in room 4 back in 2014. Bright, quiet. She went missing. Cops searched the house but never opened the walls. Said there was no reason to. I asked him her name. He said, Eliza. That night I searched online. Found an old article. Eliza Rowe, 19, last seen walking home from Caltech. Her friend said she'd been sleepwalking. One roommate claimed she had started hearing voices. The search was called off after 3 weeks. No leads. No body. I couldn't stay in that room another night. But before I left, I placed my phone inside the vent to record overnight, facing the crawl space. In the morning I checked the footage. At exactly 2:07 a.m. the screen shimmered, just for a second. Then something moved in the darkness. A pale face appeared. Not crawling. Standing. Pressed up against the inside of the wall. Her mouth opened like she was trying to scream, but there was no sound. Only her hand, reaching toward the camera. And then, the last frame of the recording just before it cut out. She looked directly into the lens. And mouthed my name. Story 3, The Mirror House. Location, Linda Vista, Pasadena, 2020. When my great-aunt Eleanor passed away in 2020, she left me her home in the hills of Linda Vista. I hadn't seen her since I was a child, but I remembered the house. It was perched on a slope, surrounded by ivy and red brick. Big arched windows. Black shutters. The kind of place that belonged in a Gothic novel. It had been locked up for nearly a decade. I arrived with a friend the first time, just to air it out, see what I was dealing with. The interior was pristine. No cobwebs. No dust. As if someone had been tending to it. But the strangest thing? Mirrors. Every room had at least 2. Antique glass, full-length, wall-mounted, even tucked into corners where you'd never think to hang one. Some were ornate, others plain, but all were old, tinted, a little warped like melted silver behind the glass. The mirrors made the house feel bigger than it was, almost too big. In the upstairs hallway, there was a mirror mounted opposite another, perfectly aligned, so when you passed between them, you caught a glimpse of your own reflection disappearing into infinity. That first night, I stayed in the guest room. My friend left after dark. I wasn't afraid exactly, just unsettled. Around midnight, I went to brush my teeth and saw something strange in the hallway mirror. My reflection was delayed, just by half a second. When I raised my arm, it hesitated, then followed. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. The second time it moved normally. I chalked it up to exhaustion. But the next morning, I noticed a new mirror, one I hadn't remembered seeing. Small, round, propped on the dresser in the upstairs hallway. It showed me, yes, but something about the angle seemed wrong. The background in the mirror didn't match the hallway behind me. The wallpaper was slightly darker. The sconce beside me flickered in the mirror but not in real life. I turned away. When I looked back, the mirror was gone. That night, I dreamed I was standing in the living room, surrounded by mirrors. They covered the ceiling, the walls, the floor. Each reflection was almost me, but not quite. Some were smiling when I wasn't. Some stood completely still. One of them turned away. I woke up sweating. Over the next week, I started covering the mirrors. Bedsheets, blankets, towels, anything I could find. but they uncovered themselves. Each morning, one or two would be exposed again. Then more. Then all. As if something wanted to be seen. I stopped sleeping upstairs. Took to the couch. But the living room had its own reflection. A massive antique standing mirror near the fireplace. I covered it with a drop cloth. Still at night, I heard sounds. Scratching. Not behind the walls. Behind the mirrors. Like fingernails against glass. And once, when I passed the covered mirror to go to the kitchen, I saw the cloth twitch. Like something inside shifted. I called a local antique dealer, asked about the mirrors. He came out to appraise them. He didn't last long. Stopped halfway through the second floor and said, "These aren't normal. They weren't all installed at the same time. They weren't made to be decorative." I asked, "Then what?" He said, "They're watching mirrors. Some cultures believe they're used to trap spirits, not reflect them." He didn't come back. That night, I pulled down one of the upstairs mirrors, determined to remove them all. Behind it, not drywall, just blackness, as if the wall didn't exist. I leaned in, shining my flashlight, and for a moment, a hand reached out, thin, pale, pressed flat against the inside of the glass. Fingers splayed. I dropped the mirror. It shattered across the hallway floor, and there, inside the shards, was my reflection. But it didn't match me. It was still, wide-eyed, watching. Then it smiled. That was the last night I spent in the house. I left it to the bank, moved out of state. But 2 months later, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address. No note. Inside was a compact mirror. I flipped it open, and behind my reflection, there was someone standing in my hallway, watching me. Story 4, The Test That Never Ended. Location, San Rafael Hills, Pasadena, 2019. In 2019, the Granger family moved into a strange little house high in the San Rafael Hills, tucked away on a dead-end street, surrounded by brush and canyon trails. The place had an almost bunker-like feel. Concrete walls, thick doors, and narrow, windowless rooms downstairs. But the view was perfect, the price was unbeatable, and the paperwork said it was sound. It wasn't until their son started sleepwalking that they realized something wasn't right, and that the house wasn't just built for safety. It was built to hold something in. The house had a small basement, which was rare for the area. It had once been a lab of some kind. According to old documents, a Cold War private research space for testing communications blackout conditions. The floor was poured concrete. The ceiling was steel. There were no windows. And yet, the boy, Evan, started going down there in his sleep. His parents found him one morning sitting on the bare floor, whispering to someone in the dark. When they touched his shoulder, he jolted awake and screamed. He didn't remember going down. Didn't remember saying anything. Just said, "I was repeating the test." They wrote it off as stress. The move. Maybe nightmares. But every night around 2:12 a.m., something strange happened. The family's cell signals would drop. Wi-Fi would blink out. TV would go black. And then Evan's voice could be heard softly from somewhere in the house, even if he was still asleep in bed. Once his parents followed the sound. It led them to the basement. They found the lights on. The old test monitor in the wall, once assumed broken, was flashing green. And written in chalk across the floor were the words, "Begin Phase 2. They scrubbed it off, locked the door. But the next night, the door was open. The lights were on. And this time the screen read, "Subject will return." The father, a civil engineer, began investigating the home's blueprints. He discovered an unlisted corridor. He knocked on a wall in the basement and heard a hollow thud. Broke through it with a sledgehammer. Behind the drywall was a sealed passage, 8 feet long, ending in a steel door. No knob. Just a keypad and a single yellow light. The door was cold. They never opened it. But every night after the blackout, the yellow light turned green. They brought in a contractor who refused to touch it. He said it wasn't listed on city plans. Said it wasn't just a panic room, it looked military. They sealed the basement. Stopped using it. Covered the stairs with furniture. But Evan changed. He stopped talking to his parents. Started repeating numbers in his sleep. Phase 4 initiated. Test integrity compromised. Seal breach pending. Then one night, the family woke to a buzzing sound, low and pulsing like old radio static. It came from the air vents. When they opened them, they found nothing. But written in black marker inside one duct was, "The test is not over." They moved out the next week. But the final night, as they packed boxes, the father turned on the TV just to drown out the silence. It lit up with a black screen. Then a green text prompt. Subject lost. Replacement incoming. The power went out. The phone died. And deep in the floor beneath their feet, they heard something move. Story 5. The Second Staircase. Location: Orange Grove Boulevard, Pasadena, 2023. When Theo and Amelia bought their Craftsman home just off Orange Grove Boulevard, they were excited to finally settle down. The house was nearly 100 years old, full of beautiful woodwork antique fixtures, and a sprawling wraparound porch. It had been empty for a while, but the listing said good bones. What it didn't say, that the house had a staircase no one could explain. At first it seemed normal. 2 floors, 3 bedrooms upstairs, living space and kitchen below. 1 staircase near the center of the house, tucked behind a pocket door. But one day, while reorganizing closets, Amelia discovered something strange. A wall that sounded hollow behind the pantry. Theo got curious. He pried off a wooden panel and found a narrow, steep staircase going upward. But it didn't connect to the second floor. The stairs curved behind the kitchen and vanished into darkness. There was no door at the top, just blackness. Theo climbed partway. The air was tight and warm, and the wooden steps creaked like they hadn't been touched in decades. He didn't reach the top. Said it felt wrong. They assumed it was an old service stairway, maybe blocked off during renovations. Still, they sealed it again. 2 nights later, Theo woke to a sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from inside the wall. Creak, creak, creak. Amelia heard them too. They followed the sound into the kitchen. It stopped. Theo opened the pantry. The panel they'd sealed? Gone. The staircase stood open, but there was no one there. They sealed it again with screws this time. The next night, the same thing. Footsteps. And this time, something new. A low whisper. A woman's voice. Amelia pressed her ear to the wall and heard it. Coming down again. They stopped using the kitchen door. Slept with the lights on. But one morning, Amelia went downstairs and found something on the floor. Dusty footprints. Small. Bare. Leading from the pantry to the front door. They called a local historian who specialized in Pasadena homes. She pulled the records. The house had been rebuilt in the 1950s after a fire. Original layout showed 2 staircases, one for residents, one for staff. But after the fire, only one had been reinstalled. The other had been bricked over. She said quietly, if there's a second staircase now, someone reopened it. Theo swore they hadn't. That night, they set up cameras in the kitchen. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the mic picked up creaking. The pantry door opened by itself. The camera feed flickered. Went black for 8 seconds. When it returned, the door was closed. But a shadow moved across the far wall. Tall, thin, human-shaped. They sealed the stairwell one final time, with brick and plaster. But the footsteps continued. Sometimes going up. Sometimes down. And one night, Amelia woke up to find dust on the bedroom floor, with 2 long streaks dragging toward the hallway, like something crawling had passed through. They moved out in the spring. But last month, Theo got a letter forwarded to his office. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid photo. It showed the old pantry open again, the stairs uncovered, and at the top, a hand, pale, reaching out from the dark. End of story 5. That concludes tonight's episode. 5 haunted house stories from Pasadena, California. If you enjoyed these true-style horror stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Nick's Scary Stories for more tales just like these every week. And remember, sometimes the scariest thing in your house is what's always been there, waiting.